Welcome to your Daily Detroit for Friday, May 29th, 2020. I'm Jer Stays. Today's show is in 3 acts. First, we'll update you on some quick stories to know around Metro Detroit. Then, Karen Dybis joins me to talk about how local hotels, businesses that were planning to have a banner year in 2020 before the coronavirus, are making changes and adjusting. And then finally, some of the most well-known brand names in Metro Detroit are what's called mid-market businesses. And they're at real risk here, falling into a gap between the Paycheck Protection Program and large corporations. Sven Gustafson chats with Christoper Letts, the chairman of the Detroit chapter of the Association of Corporate Growth. And yeah, it sounds super wonky, and it kind of is, but it's interesting as a large number of people are employed by those companies right here in Southeast Michigan. So before we get started, a quick thanks to our members who make the show possible. It makes it so this podcast can be free for everyone else. You can become one of those fine folks at patreon.com/dailydetroit. Stickers are here for you. I'm very excited. Well, let's just get started. Let's do the top-line coronavirus numbers in the state. Michigan now has more than 56,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 5,372 fatalities due to the virus. That's a little over 400 new cases since Wednesday and 38 deaths. But key to know is that 17 deaths were added because of a review of records. In the city of Detroit, there were 25 more cases and 0 deaths as of the 24-hour numbers reported Thursday. This is the time of the week unemployment numbers come out, so let's take a quick look at that too. The state's overall rate is just over 23%. That's the 5th highest in the country. In the last week, there were 57,000 more claims, bringing the total to more than 2.1 million Michiganders who are out of work. All of this adds up to a big budget shortfall for the state of Michigan. State officials are lobbying the federal government for direct assistance to stave off massive budget cuts, with the revenue shortfall being about $3 billion right now. Governments across the country are expected to be making gigantic service cuts as Republicans on the federal level are opposed to local aid in the wake of the virus. In a presser Thursday, Whitmer outlined her priorities that include schools and first responders. But there have been alarm bells rung that the cuts to education could be massive, and we looked at those with Bridge Magazine's Ron French in a previous episode. I will link to that in the show notes. But I'm going to add 2 cents of context here, tracking the story down because, look, on a very practical level, it's important, and it's going to impact your life in tons of ways. So here's the thing. Michigan's budget will be balanced. Legally, it has to be. States can't print money. But we're going to have an economic wave of the coronavirus that's going to mean so many things we take for granted from our states and cities will have to go away for a while. Although some politicians point to the possibility of declaring bankruptcy and taking that money out of the pockets of retirees, on a practical level, that may not even be possible. And is that really what we want to do? But thousands and thousands of people could lose their jobs, as well as the secondary impact of defunding schools and public works projects like roads, and that's what's going to happen. The decisions are all going to suck. That'll mean another large number of layoffs when the economy needs it least, taking away money from schools when they have increased costs. And fixing the damn roads? Well, that's a damn joke at this point. The roads will still crumble because nature continues, even as they did while we refused as a community to admit how much they cost to fix. But now, without a major infrastructure program that we've been promised from the administration for years, we won't be able to do much about it. There's some finger-pointing going on and hoping for the long shot that Washington, D.C., with Republicans in power whom have wanted massive cuts in state governments for a long time, will change their mind. The governor said we need to work in a bipartisan way, and it sounds nice, and I wish I lived in that world. But if you haven't looked, this is a partisan pandemic where people on both sides of the aisle have vastly different beliefs, even disagreeing about if the virus is a real threat. I don't think there will be any progress, though, without massive action by the general public. And that would mean you. If that doesn't happen, I suggest buckling up now. There will be no public or communal pools open this summer in Wayne, Oakland, or Macomb counties. In a joint statement, the health departments of the 3 counties issued public health orders requiring all swimming pools licensed by each jurisdiction to remain closed indefinitely. Licensed pools include those that serve apartment buildings, clubs, condominiums, and hotels. Other recreational pools include, but are not limited to, dive pools, wave pools, and water slide pools. Therapy pools used strictly for treatment in healthcare settings are excluded. Although the pool water itself may not be a transmitter of coronavirus, public pools encourage the kind of up-close, non-social distance behavior that does spread the disease. The goal is to help stop the spread of COVID-19 ahead of the school year. We told you a while ago about Dan Gilbert's Bedrock Real Estate giving a break on rent to their restaurant and retail tenants to help them weather the economic storm. Well, now they've extended that, but with a twist, as a program called Bedrock Relaunch. Not only is rent and fees to those businesses waived through June now, what Bedrock is doing is just charging 7% of gross sales for rent for the foreseeable future. That will be at least until the end of 2020. Also, tenant security deposits can be used to make modifications to their spaces to deal with the COVID-19 threat. Couple quick thoughts. One, Uncle Dan is in the financial position to do this, but it will mean more retail will bounce back in downtown Detroit when this is over. A percentage number is a lot easier to hit than a hard one in these times. And two, looking at the time frame of this story and the last one from both health experts and one of the most savvy businessmen in the state, it's clear there's preparations being made that this is going to be with us for a while. In an update to a story we've talked about a few times, events around the Woodward Dream Cruise have been canceled. The organization has been holding out later than other big gatherings in the region around these cancellations. Originally planned for mid-August, all community events for the cruise have been nixed in the face of concerns around COVID-19 and mounting political pressure from cities along Woodward. Specifically, the city of Birmingham city manager Joe Valentine said to Channel 4 WDIV, quote, "Let's not attract 1.5 million during a pandemic," unquote. Although the events are canceled, cops can't really stop people from driving down Woodward, and according to a number of Woodward Corridor listeners, it's been a very active for Wildcat cruisers on weekends. Returning and joining me again is Karen Dybis. It's good to hear from you, Karen.
Hey, good to be heard.
Absolutely. So, you did a piece this week that I wanted to talk about. It was on freep.com about hotels, because it's this thing that, we have all been kind of hunkering down in our homes and, eating out less and all these other things. And travel's been kind of the farthest thing from our mind, but it's a huge business. And I understand that it was going to be a banner year for Metro Detroit and hotels.
Yes, there was going to be so many different conferences and groups coming into Detroit, especially among big June events. You had the auto show, but then you also had conferences like the Alcoholics Anonymous. Every 5-year conference had selected Detroit, and that was going to use up an estimated 113 hotels around the area. So this would have been a huge income boost to a region that really needed it because of the moving of the auto show from January. So this is a disappointing year as a result. So instead of 70 to 90% of the rooms being used, it's around 10 or 15%, a lot of the hotels are saying.
I got to imagine that's almost impossible to keep operating at that low of a percentage.
Yeah, much like the other industries in our area, they are really struggling to keep people employed because they have to be able to have the income and revenue to balance their costs. So the challenge is you have to keep these places, these big institutions like a hotel, clean and sanitized to gain your guests back. But then how do you pay for having the enlarged staffs? Because everybody's had to bring on extra people to take care of all this. So the hotels are feeling that pinch just like the rest of us.
Well, you took a look at one of the gems in Metro Detroit, and that's the Royal Park Hotel, and what they're trying to do to make this happen. Because at some point, travel kind of has to resume for a variety of reasons, and people are going to need hotels again, but we've got kind of a new world with the specter of the coronavirus out there, at least for the foreseeable future.
Most definitely. And that hotel, I thought, did a really good job of appealing to its guests to help them understand the process of getting ready to reopen. They created a 2-page document that pops up right when you go to their website. You can read through their procedures. Then they also did a Zoom call with their head of the housekeeping and other staffers explaining the process. So you could watch that on YouTube Plus, they have purchased additional equipment to the tune of $6,000 for one in particular, which is a Clorox electrostatic sprayer system.
Ooh, that sounds fancy.
I mean, this is a thing that goes through almost like a Roomba on steroids and keeps your hotel sparkling clean. So in addition to the baseline of all the important things hotels did to make people feel clean and taken care of, they are adding all these name brand products, from Procter & Gamble. You have your different kind of cleaners from Febreze to, you name it. They're partnering with all these different kind of companies to give that customer the reassurance that as clean as you're trying to keep your home and the wearing of the masks and the gloves in public, we're trying to give you that at the same experience, but amped up because of the size of the facilities.
Well, what are some of the things that if you do end up going to a hotel, in due time, what are some of the things that guests should know and maybe guests should think about doing themselves?
Well, I think in a lot of cases, you can socially distance through their grounds and the different ways they're setting up the hotel. So like there's one in Royal Oak that was a former motor lodge. So Hotel Royal Oak allows you to drive up directly to your room. You never need to go to the lobby. So if you are concerned about the coronavirus and want to isolate yourself, maybe look for that style of a hotel where they have a way for you to use an app to check in, and then you can digitally open your door using your smartphone. So that's one way to travel where you can feel reassured. And then a lot of them are also adding drop-off sanitation kits. So when you get to the hotel, they'll just leave it outside your hotel room, and then you can clean the hotel room again if you feel the need, plus sanitize your baggage as it comes and goes, especially if you use, let's say, a bellhop, or if you're in some of the higher end hotels where there's a little more, they want to give you great customer service and be high touch, but they understand that, again, people are going to have concerns that they have to be very serious in addressing.
It's kind of funny how everything that's old is new again. I've driven by that hotel. I think the one you're talking about is on 11 Mile in Royal Oak countless times. Yeah, countless times. And, it's a leftover from the motel days. And to see that kind of coming back together, I mean, they've done a job, definitely, like cleaning it up and giving it a refresh and a redo. But, I mean, everything that's old is new again, I guess.
Yeah, it's going back to some of Grandma's ways and looking at the way these different facilities are laid out. That one, for example, the Hotel Royal Oak, is on a big piece of property, too. So if you want to socially distance and get out of your room, let's say you want to use your laptop or something, you can go sit out on the grounds, and they've created kind of these little mini spaces. And the same thing, for example, at the one in Rochester, the Royal Park Hotel, they're encouraging people to go take a walk in the local trails. Rochester has all these beautiful winding pathways, and they'll rent you a bike and you can go exploring. So they're trying to think of ways that they can balance the challenges of the interiors, in enclosed spaces like elevators and breakfast rooms, to give you also that sense of outdoor space and freedom, which is something that I think everybody can appreciate right now.
And looking to the future, how do you think this might impact the design and construction of hotels in the future?
Yeah, that was something else that we touched on, is there's a local hotel group that develops them. And I asked that gentleman, what do you think is going to happen? He said right now they're in that wait and see. They want to see if the different brands they work with, your Hyatts and all the big national brands, what are they going to do differently? And one of those big things is your public spaces. So we may see hotels really eliminate some of the bigger things that we've gotten used to, i.e. your fitness rooms, business centers, swimming pools, anywhere that people congregate may either become smaller or they could limit access to it. The front desk is being a place where it used to be a great spot to kind of meet your hotelier. And then the concierge, of course, to get tips on where to go and places to see. They all now have the plexiglass guard area in front of it. So those areas are going to be, I think, at least in the short term impacted, if not permanently changed over the long term. So we'll have to see how the construction and development changes as this, I guess, pandemic progresses.
Well, the piece is called Your Next Metro Detroit Hotel Stay Will Look Different. What you'll notice, and you'll find it on freep.com. Thanks so much, Karen Dybis, for your time today. And Sven Gustafson, you're up next, my friend.
Our next guest today has written a piece in D-Business. The headline is "Don't Let Michigan's Middle Market Fall Victim to COVID-19." Christoper Letts is chairman of the Detroit chapter of the Association for Corporate Growth. which is an organization that advocates for middle market businesses. Christoper, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Sven, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. You define mid-size companies, mid-size businesses as having between $10 million and $1 billion in annual revenue. They make up just 1% of all businesses here in the United States. So, to start with, why are they important? Why focus on them?
So great question. Although these middle market businesses make up only 1% of all businesses across the country, the middle market is directly accountable for over 1/3 of all U.S. GDP. So if you think about that, 1% of businesses being responsible for 1/3 of our economy, it's massive. I think more importantly than that, though, if you look at the amount of individuals employed by these businesses, on an American national average, it's 1 in 4 workers work for one of these mid-sized companies. Here in Michigan, it's even more meaningful. It's actually 1 in 3 here in Southeast Michigan. Beyond just the juggernauts that these businesses are in terms of current employment, if you look at new hiring over the past decade and taking into account the decade immediately following the financial crisis that we had in 08 and 09, these 1% of businesses, these middle market businesses, hired more than 50% of all new hires since the Great Financial Crisis or the Great Recession, depending on how you want to refer to it. So although they're only 1%, they are incredibly meaningful to our economy and even more meaningful to the many families who work for them.
Mm-hmm. You write that these kinds of companies are, in your words, frequently overlooked by policymakers who often focus on the interests of small businesses and large corporations. What has the federal government done, if anything, for middle market companies?
So the federal government, to answer your question, has yet to really make a big impact to the middle market. And so we've heard a lot of conversation around the PPP program, which is this program that was designed for small businesses that essentially provided forgivable loans if used to keep employees on payroll. So these small businesses were defined by this program as businesses up to 500 employees. And so if you look at the middle market, quite often these businesses have in excess of 500 employees. Mm-hmm. And essentially they didn't qualify for the PPP program. So recognizing this, Congress has put in plans to enable the Federal Reserve to provide lending known as this Main Street Lending Program for these middle-sized businesses. These lending programs are not forgivable if used to pay employees or a portion of these proceeds to pay rent. But the government is recognizing that there's a big liquidity crunch that's oncoming for these middle market businesses. And so I'd say it hasn't done it much because although this program was announced in April, the funding has yet to roll out to these businesses. From what we've heard, it's going to happen here later next month. We hope that takes place. But there's been a real disconnect, it seems, with the needs of small businesses, which, by the way, is incredibly important that we focus on that part of our economy and make sure that that part of our economy is well capitalized.
Sure.
There's also been a focus on large corporations, right? We've heard about aviation bailouts. We've also read about hospital bailouts. There needs to be a real focus on this very small but extremely critical part of our economy in this middle market, because if you look at these mid-market businesses, although they are larger than small businesses and smaller than large corporations, they have a lot of the same liquidity needs of small businesses because they don't have the ability to go to the public markets and raise capital either through debt offerings or tapping into the public markets because of the fact that they're not publicly traded, but they have a lot of the same responsibilities and sophisticated operations that a lot of these publicly traded companies have just due to their size. And so the purpose of my article was to raise some awareness of the importance of the middle market on our region here in Southeast Michigan, but also raise some awareness in the capital needs that these businesses have as well.
Right. You talked about how Michigan, a third of all Michigan employment is attributable to these middle market sized businesses. What are some examples here in Michigan of well-known companies that fall into that category?
Many well-known companies that fall into this category. So a good example would be Bell Tire, Big B Coffee. If you look at Bell Tire, they employ over 1,100 individuals. Roush Automotive would be a great example.
The auto supplier, yeah.
An auto supplier that has 4,000 employees. These businesses have been deemed essential, and so they've been able to work through this shutdown, which has been real helpful for obviously their businesses and more importantly their employees. But these are also companies like ABC Warehouse, right, that have 1,700 plus employees. Imagine Entertainment, so affiliated with Imagine Theaters. I mean, our theater industry is in real flux right now, understanding the realities of this coronavirus. Imagine has 1,500 employees, right? In our backyard here in Detroit, StockX, which is one of our recently crowned billion-dollar valuation businesses. This is a business that has a middle market company that employs 1,000 individuals here in Detroit. Shinola as well, 600 individuals. So, there's a lot of well-known middle market businesses that employ a lot of people in our region and our backyard here in Detroit. But there's a tremendous amount of these businesses that are middle market that you've never heard of, right? That most people, it's off their radars. It's the tier 2 automotive supplier. It's the paving company that essentially paved your neighborhood last summer. It's RV welding company that essentially assembles RVs as a part of their manufacturing practice. A lot of these businesses are well known, but many of them, because they're privately held, again, not publicly traded, are far less known, but still have an incredible impact on our community because of the number of employees that they hire and that they employ.
What specifically does the Association for Corporate Growth, advocate the federal government should do to better help these kind of companies, weather this pandemic and the economic crisis?
There is a general consensus amongst those in the middle market that the federal government would benefit from focusing on having generous lending programs be provided to the middle market in a meaningful way. The PPP program was a great example, just indicated by its oversubscription by small business, of what liquidity can do and the benefit of liquidity going to businesses that are looking to keep employees on their payrolls. If you look at the middle market, a lot of these generous programs were left out. There would certainly be a benefit to having a federal focus on these middle market entrepreneurs looking to retain employees, because as we know, if we can keep employees retained and we're able to survive some of these various state shutdowns and reemerging from this, there's going to be magnification of the economic impact to the positive by keeping these workers employed. If you look at middle market businesses, they are in a very dire space right now. There was a study that was conducted by the National Center for the Middle Market, which is essentially a think tank in partnership with Ohio State University. 25% of the people that they polled on a study that took place earlier in late March saw a 25% respondents saying that it was going to be a catastrophic impact to their businesses. A further 50% of respondents said from the middle market that the coronavirus pandemic was going to have an extremely negative, with all of the respondents, 44% saying that restructuring was most likely. And so when one says restructuring in the business community, that's bankruptcy. That's maybe not coming back. That's defaulting on debts and having to rework businesses with a new economic reality that occurs essentially after that moment in time. And so we are very, very focused on the liquidity needs for our members. We're very focused on the liquidity needs of these middle market businesses. And at the end of the day, this is really an employment issue more than anything else, because if these businesses don't survive, the employees, the workers who work for them don't survive as well in terms of their employment and their ability to continue working for that entity. And so this is extremely important to us. We're focused on it. And to the extent that we can have the federal government assist and local leaders assist, it's something that would be very beneficial for these middle market businesses.
Well, we will link to your piece in Dybis. Christoper Letts is chairman of the Detroit chapter of the Association for Corporate Growth. Christoper, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your expertise with us today.
Sven, appreciate it. Thank you.
Before I let you go, a quick note that today the Belle Isle Fountain should start running. With the stay-at-home order, it wasn't thought that the fountain would fire up for at least 6 more weeks. But the Grand Prix, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, and DT Energy worked together, providing coordination and funding, as well as engineer and fountain fixer Robert Carpenter and his skills, so the valves will turn on today. The James Scott Memorial Fountain, as it's properly called, turns 95 this Saturday. It's one of the gems of our region, and I plan on heading out there some weekday when there's less people and hanging out with the dogs. With that, Your Daily Detroit is done for today. Since it's the end of the week, thanks to Sven Gustafson, Cheyenne Nocerini, Fletcher Sharp, Karen Dybis, and of course, engineer Randy Walker. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll talk Monday. I'm Jairus Days. Take care of each other, and we'll get through this together.